Maleficent, Mistress of Evil is a sequel 5 years in the making to the other film, Maleficent, which came out in 2014, that once again stars Angelina Jolie as the title character of Maleficent, you know, the evil Disney villain that we've heard so much about. This film is directed by Joachim Ronning, I believe is their name, and it also stars Chiwetel Ejiofor, which I did not know before I came into watching this movie. Elle Fanning reprises her role from the first film as Princess Aurora, or I guess Queen Aurora as she was at the end of that film, and Michelle Pfeiffer plays the villain in this movie. What this movie basically is a gigantic dick measuring contest between the fairy folk of the forest and between the human beings, between the fairy folk and the creatures of the moors, which Aurora is the queen of, and then one day Prince Plank decides to propose to her. I'm just gonna call him Prince Plank, even though his name is Prince Philip in the movie, because I feel like he doesn't really bring much to the role outside of what a plank of wood does. Anyway, Prince Plank proposes to Aurora. Aurora says yes. This means that there's supposed to be a big union between the humans and between the fairy folk of the moors. So Maleficent and Aurora are invited to dinner, or they're invited to the castle to meet the king and the queen of the human place. That dinner, of course, goes bad, and then Maleficent and Aurora are put at odds, and then there's a big conspiracy, and then there's, you know, there's a bunch of fantasy stuff that happens, and Maleficent has to save the day. You know, that's basically the story. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what the story is. I don't really have a lot of strong emotions tied to the first film. I mean, I didn't hate it like a lot of other people seem to. I didn't love it. I didn't like it. I just thought it was okay. Angelina Jolie is pretty good as Maleficent, but does this really need a sequel? And so I walked into this movie with not a lot of excitement, not a lot of anticipation. Oddly enough, I walk out of this movie once again not really feeling any type of way about it. It's fine. It's decent. There are some things to like about it, but overall, this was a sequel that probably didn't need to be made. I'll praise the one thing that deserved praise in the first film 5 years ago, which is Angelina Jolie as Maleficent. She's great. She's great as this character. She embodies this character and everything that they're trying to go for, the direction that they're trying to take her in these movies. She does a good job at blending malice and ill intent with compassion and understanding, and you can definitely see that reflected in her facial expressions throughout the film. I feel like Maleficent, she's not necessarily a nice person, but you also feel like she's not evil. You feel like she actually does have some good in her, and so if that's what they're going for, I feel like Angelina Jolie definitely nailed that balance. She was able to walk that line. She did a good job in this movie. Elle Fanning is also really good as Queen Aurora in this movie. There's an interesting concept in this movie where they take Aurora and they take Maleficent and they try to put them at odds. I do respect the concept, and I think that Elle Fanning is able to portray a lot of the turmoil that comes with that really well in this film. Chiwetel Ejiofor, who I did not know was going to be in this film, is probably one of the standout characters for me, even though towards the end of the film he becomes a really big exposition type of character. The story associated with him and with Maleficent in this movie was kind of interesting and kind of added to the lore of this universe that they've created here. One of the weird things about this movie is that I actually had to get a refresher course in the first one because it was 5 years ago, because that movie was so unremarkable to me that I don't really remember that much about it. It says here that the guy that plays Prince Philip, aka Prince Plank, in this movie was actually played by Brendan Thwaites in the first film. If you don't know who Brendan Thwaites is, he's Dick Grayson, he's Nightwing from Titans. Well, damn. There's a sloppy and overly glossy feel to some of the visual effects in this film, and that's why I can't really go high mark in terms of the visuals, but in terms of the cinematography, it's pretty good, and the third act does have some really exciting sequences involving CG. I feel like if you were bored for maybe the first 2/3 of the film, I feel like the third act is going to give you most of what you're looking for here. I didn't really feel any type of way when this movie was done. It was kind of meh for most of it. Like, it was happening. It was alright. It was decent. I was just kind of sitting there like, Definitely a lot of predictable elements in this story and in this script that you're going to see coming. You're going to know exactly how some things in this movie are going to play out. Not like the fun kind of predictable like Creed, where you know what's going to happen, but you're just like, oh, I'm so invested in these characters and whatever that I can't wait to see how it happens, even though I know how it's going to happen. This is the boring kind of predictable where you know what's going to happen and you're just kind of like, oh, so that's where it's going. How long is this movie again? Michelle Pfeiffer does what she can with what she's given, but unfortunately she's not really given all that much to work with. For most of the movie, she's just a generic evil person. The film did not do a good enough job either building up her villainy or also building up the rivalry between her and Maleficent. It takes until like the literal third act of this movie before you find out anything about her of consequence, and feels like one of those things where they just threw that exposition in there so that you at least have an explanation for how generic a villain she is. When Maleficent wasn't on screen, when Maleficent wasn't doing her thing, the movie movie was honestly kind of boring. They tried to make other aspects of the movie interesting. There are times, unfortunately, in this film where Maleficent feels like a supporting character in her own movie, and I'm not entirely sure why the movie's even called Mistress of Evil. Mistress of Evil was a fine enough movie. It was alright, but overall, I don't think you're gonna lose any sleep if you miss this one. Mistress of Evil was pretty meh overall as a film, and I'm gonna leave this one in the Fortress of Solitude. Which live-action Disney movie is your favorite right now? Please like and subscribe to the Superfan Show, and as always, if you like what you see, tell me how you feel, and stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace.